I think, frankly, that Trump has moved more on Russia than he has on any other foreign policy issue over the last 6 months. He thought that Putin was prepared to give him a deal. He was wrong.
The United States wants the rest of the West to come with it. The United States wants to remain the leader of the Western bloc, because if the United States doesn't take that role, then there's every chance that when you hear people like Macron making really good cases for a sort of tripolar, multipolar world within which the European bloc is a power base in its own right and not always aligned with the US interest. It might seek to kind of calibrate between the US and the Chinese relationship. And I don't think that that is in the US's long-term strategic interest. So I absolutely share your view there. But I do think, I mean, I've heard people this week say that they, who are no friend of Trump, to be fair, but people saying that they thought Rutte got it wrong with calling Trump daddy, that was a sort of, that was just too much. I think that, or my take is, you're more of a scholar of him than I am, but the measure of the man is that he needs to hear that sort of language to keep him interested, to keep him friendly, and therefore Rutte did the right thing at the NATO summit. Do you agree?
Not completely. I think that Rutte, I like Mark personally. I knew him quite well when he was prime minister in the Netherlands and advised him a bunch informally. But I think that Trump, number one, I think Trump doesn't actually respect people who kiss quite that much ass. I think that you can, a better way of playing Trump is in being deferential and showing respect. And yes, absolutely praise him when he's getting it right, but also standing up for the things that really matter to you. I think that, for example, Claudia Sheinbaum has done a much better job with Trump in that regard, and he has more respect for her. I think Mark Carney has done a better job. I think MBS has done a better job. So again, there are other examples, right? And like when Mark Zuckerberg, goes full on obsequious. He actually, Trump laughs about, Zuckerberg privately. And I think he does the same with Rutte, which is why he decided to share those texts, because they were so overbearing. And I think they do, look, I think Rutte he took one for the team. The summit went well. It's much better that Rutte does that, who's in a position that doesn't really matter, than the president of France or the premier of the UK. Fair enough. But I do think that on the margins, and we'll all forget about this at some point, that Rutte did some damage to the legitimacy of being Secretary General in NATO that he didn't have to do. And look, those texts were not intended to be made public, but in Mark's position, and he is, again, no novice to what intelligence is like, if you're writing a text, you expect that it will be made public at some point. Yeah. And he wasn't careful. He wasn't careful, in my view.
I am conscious of your time. We've only got 6 or 7 minutes left, and I want to just touch on two things, if I may. Firstly, that after you and I, the third most important person visiting DC this week was Bibi Netanyahu, and it would be good to get your thoughts on what he went home with, and then finally, I'm intrigued to get your thoughts on what happened over the Ukrainian military aid. I'm hearing that Bridge Colby is all powerful in the DoD and is running policy. But look, let's get your thoughts on that. Netanyahu and Iran, and then the US position on Ukraine.
Netanyahu, Iran, the Americans and the Israelis are now in reasonable agreement that the Iranian nuclear program has been set back at least 2 years by the damage that's been done. I'm glad that those assessments are becoming, sort of more reasonable and more public, and that's pretty significant. Americans are much more interested in engaging in negotiations at this point. Both countries are in a much stronger position than Iran. Iran was not able to do anything of meaning in response to the American attacks. This looks like a big win for Trump. Having now done that, Bibi and his Likud party are much more popular inside Israel. If Israel wanted to move forward with peace in Gaza, he could lose his far-right coalition partners, call a snap election, and there's a pretty good chance he'd be able to win with new coalition partners. And that's what's required if you want peace in Gaza. That's what required if you want Palestinians to have some level of autonomy, statehood or otherwise. That's what's required if you want the Saudis to join the Abraham Accords. As of this week, we're still pretty far from that. We could get a ceasefire, a short-term ceasefire. The sides are close there. The Trump folks, privately I'm talking to, are still blaming largely Hamas for that, not the Israelis. But they think significant progress has been made, and that's why the Qataris came through and all of that. So that's where we are on Netanyahu. And the Nobel Peace Prize stuff is all just stupid. Plus Pakistan got there first. On defense, you're right. I mean, Bridge Colby is in charge of policy at defense. He's certainly much more capable than the secretary is. And he has been trying to ensure that the United States has enough capacity for itself before it is providing for others, for allies. And he's also kind of playing the role that, sort of Bessent and Lutnick have on the economic side, which is, we're going to push countries harder on deals. And that has, first meant a review of AUKUS, which the Australians are already starting to pay for, these submarines. The Australians are very upset about this. And also it led to this suspension with Ukraine. But here, Trump, when he met with Zelensky, was not aware of it back in The Hague a couple weeks ago, and he intervened. And he wants to make sure that the Ukrainians do get this military support and are having more weapons being sold to them, which the Europeans are prepared to spend more money on. And I think, frankly, that Trump has moved more on Russia than he has on any other foreign policy issue over the last 6 months. He thought that Putin was prepared to give him a deal. He was wrong. He offered a lot. Including squeezing the Ukrainians pretty hard, but offered a lot in terms of reduction of sanctions and the rest. And Putin gave him nothing. Trump is embarrassed by that. He's angry by that. He is not in Putin's pocket. That's lazy analysis that annoys me. And he's now preparing not just to provide more support for the Ukrainians, but also thinking about what additional sanctions against Russia might look like. And that, of course, puts the Europeans in a very different position than the panic that they were facing back when I was in Munich in February and Vice President J.D. Vance was telling the Europeans, no, you guys are the principal adversaries. We're in a very different position here in July, and I'm glad to see it. So it turns out that Trump can actually learn, right? I mean, he'll never admit that he was wrong about anything, but the reality is he was wrong about this.
Yeah, and it's and to his credit, he appears to be grasping that and now doing the right thing. I think everybody could see that Putin was playing him, but someone who is passionately supportive of the Ukrainian cause, I'm very grateful to see that he's now changing his position. Just very quickly, that AUKUS review. If you had to place your bets on the AUKUS submarines happening with American yard capacity being taken up as a consequence, would you bet on it happening or not?
Yeah, I think it'll happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if there are some delays.
Yeah. I fear that is true, which is a great shame. I thought that the AUKUS deal is one of the main big strategic things the last few years, but I understand the America First imperative.
I am told, I don't know if this is public yet, but what the hell, I'll say it to you, that there's going to be a big bipartisan Senate delegation going to Australia in the summer, and I think that will help. There's a lot of effort to make sure that this relationship, this critical security relationship, which also the Americans run a surplus on trade with the Australians, that it remains strong and solid and that we don't take them for granted. I think that there's going to be more focus on that.